We should do the chant. Oh,
Yatha on opening the sutra, the Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the
Tathagata's true meaning. Good morning.
Good morning, Sensei. Increase the volume.
Oh, put him on
Speaker.
Yeah,
single speaker.
It is on speaker.
actually just leave it. I don't want to fool around with this.
Got it.
Are we ready, Jeff?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay. So, just to cheer everybody up, I thought that today I would talk about what we refer in Zen as the great matter. And that's the matter of life and death. So, one of the places to start would be to ask the question, what is life and what is death? This is many years ago, but out in LA, Maizumi once put a sign that he had lettered on the door to the Zendo. And the sign read, if you want to clarify the great matter of life and death, you are welcome. If not, stay out. So, sort of a statement of the importance of the great matter of life and death. Of course, he's saying in this message that if you're not willing to face this matter of life and death, don't even bother to take up this practice. I would say a little differently, which is to take up the practice, but to be prepared at some point in your practice to face this matter of life and death. So what is it about life and death that many of us don't want to face? And much has been written about the death-denying culture that we live in. And it emphasizes youth and pushes away aging, cosmetic surgery and Botox abound. And people will go extreme ends to avoid facing the inevitable. Yet if we spend some time in nature, excuse me, we see that the world, the universe, is in constant flux. Things are always changing. Nothing stays the same. If we sit and watch, we see life and death as an integral and inevitable part of the flow of our existence. Bigger fish consume smaller fish. A drought comes and a variety of flora and fauna dies. The early bird, if he's lucky, catches the worm. And all of this activity occurs as part of the natural activity of what is. And it appears that, except for humans, all other forms of life move harmoniously within this ebb and flow. Sorry. And throw in a haiku. The station clock, arrivals and departures, over and over. So why is it that human beings seem to have difficulty with this matter of life and death? So one way to approach the question is to ask, what is life and what is death? And if we sit with the question, we may realize that life and death are just names, and that we associate feelings and preferences to these names. And if we stay with this, if we continue to sit with it, We may also see that naming removes us from direct experience. And in so doing, life and death are changed from experiences to concepts. And as a result, we see ourselves in opposition with them. It creates a duality. There's a me and there's a life. There's a me and there's a death, which I am usually denying or trying to fight off. Now, another aspect of our sense of self, another aspect of this is our sense of self. There's someone to whom life and death occurs. And just as we asked ourselves, what is life and what is death, we can also ask ourselves, what is this self? Who is me? Who is it that dies? And if we sit with this, we might also discover that me is just another name or aggregate of names, old, young, smart, slow, handsome, not handsome, and so forth. This accumulation of names is what I call myself. And this self seems commonsensical and real, solid. But in reality, if we sit long enough, we realize that that person that we call a self is a fiction. So, of course, the immediate question is, how can this be? So let me give you a little story of something that happened to me once. After a long day, I came home and I was tired and I was aggravated and I was grouchy because I was really hungry. I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. So I looked in the refrigerator and I saw that there was a sandwich from Whole Foods. And it was like all my emotional state changed. I relaxed, I sort of regained my sense of humor. And so I found a high protein sandwich, which was perfect for the occasion. And I went to get a drink to go with the sandwich, noticing how, like as I said, how much my physiology had changed. And when I go back to the refrigerator, I discover it wasn't a sandwich at all. It was a brown mustard bottle laying on its side. But because I named it a sandwich and attributed a certain characteristics to it, my life had changed for a few minutes. My outlook had changed. But all of this was a fiction because it was not a sandwich. It was not what I perceived it to be. So this belief that there's a separate self creates, of course, fear and anxiety, especially if we entertain the possibility that this self might go out of existence. So we do everything we can to maintain it, to prolong it, to justify it. And I think I've told this story at least twice, but it sort of fits to this, which is this experience that I once had when I wanted to go out and plant flowers in the yard. So I brought the flowers to the place where I was going to plant them, and I turned over the soil, and this whole process of planting the flowers probably took me 45 minutes to an hour. And that entire time, there was no self. There was no Carl. There was just planting the flowers. So it occurred to me for that 45 minutes to an hour, I was dead. I had no sense of self. I was not concerned with living or dying. I was just concerned with that present moment. So there's another element to this discussion, and that is that our minds create the idea of time. So we think, I am born, I live my life, and I die. We create a movement through time which ends in death. Now, Dogen once said, life is a position at one time. Death is a position at one time. And when we think we are experiencing life directly without naming, without conceptualizing time, without thinking about beginning or an end, there is just this, just this. There's no past, there's no future, there's no story about living and dying. It's just this moment. So as I said, it's the mind that creates a future. You know, I noticed this having turned 80. I catch myself looking at life differently. Talking to somebody about going away together on a trip, and the first thing that comes to mind is, how much time do I have left? Should I wait until next year or should I do it this year? And it's because I'm listening to this story that I have in my mind, but it's created by me. It's created by me and my relationship to my age and how much time I imagine that I have left. And so I like to think of myself as an optimistic person. So I might postpone it 1 year, but certainly not 2 years. So ultimately, to practice Zen is to die, to face the death of all our ideas, all our names, also including those we use to identify ourselves, including all those we use to identify ourselves. And this dying of this story that we have created of who we are and what our life is and where we started out and where we're gonna go. That's called the great death. But at the same time, it's the great rebirth. The self goes from being this little isolated me, lost in this great universe, to being the great universe itself. So even if we're 80 years old, we can be reborn. So once we realize this, we are free to go back and use all the names we would like, because we now realize, we now see through them, just like the mustard bottle. Just a tiny story by way of ending. There was a funeral ceremony, and it was at the Zen Center of New York. And I don't remember whose funeral it was, but there was a certain point in the funeral where there was silence. And Soen Roshi got up to speak. And he just stood in silence for probably a minute or so. And then he asked the question, who will be next? So, and then he sat down. So I ask you, and I ask myself daily, who will be next?